The dust-laden wind carried more than just the scent of sage and sun-baked earth as Gabrielle Scott stepped off the stagecoach into Willow Creek, her hopeful heart sinking at the sight of the crowd gathered to welcome the new arrivals. The year was 1876, and she had journeyed west with dreams as big as the Montana sky, clutching nothing but a valise containing her worldly possessions and a teaching certificate that promised a fresh start. "Lord have mercy," a woman's voice carried across the platform. "Would you look at that dress?" Gabrielle's cheeks burned as hot as the August sun. She glanced down at her gown, a hand-me-down from her cousin back east. The once fashionable mauve silk with ivory lace trim had seemed elegant when she'd packed it, but after days of travel, it was wrinkled beyond repair and spotted with dust. The hem was frayed, and one of the pearl buttons hung by a thread. "Reckon she thinks she's headed to some fancy Boston tea party instead of a one-room schoolhouse," another woman said, not bothering to lower her voice. Laughter rippled through the small gathering of women who had come to inspect the new schoolteacher. Gabrielle swallowed hard, fighting the urge to flee back onto the coach that was already pulling away. Her fingers curled tightly around the handle of her valise, knuckles whitening with the strain. "You look beautiful to me, madam," came a deep voice from her right. Gabrielle turned to find a tall man removing his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields. His eyes, bluer than any Montana sky, met hers with such sincerity that her breath caught in her throat. "Wade Daniels, madam," he said with a slight bow. "Town marshal." "Been expecting our new schoolteacher." "Gabrielle Scott," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "That would be me." Marshal Daniels nodded, his sun-bronzed face breaking into a smile that transformed his rugged features. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Scott." "Don't mind the welcoming committee. Folks here ain't seen new faces since spring roundup." He extended an arm to take her valise, which she relinquished gratefully. As they walked away from the still whispering women, Gabrielle couldn't help but notice how the marshal's presence seemed to part the crowd like Moses at the Red Sea. "The schoolhouse is just down the main street," he explained, matching his long strides to her shorter ones. "Got a little living quarters attached to the back, nothing fancy, but it's clean. The last teacher, Miss Jenkins, left it in good order before she got married and moved to Oregon." "I'm sure it will be more than adequate," Gabrielle replied, trying to sound confident despite her misgivings. She hadn't expected such open hostility from the townswomen, and she wondered if accepting this position had been a terrible mistake. "Mind my asking what brings a lady like yourself all the way out here from?" He paused, studying her face. "Pennsylvania." "Massachusetts," she corrected with a small smile. "Boston, and I came because I wanted to make a difference. There aren't many opportunities for female teachers back east, too many qualified women, not enough positions. Well, out here it's the opposite. Too many children needing schooling, not enough brave souls willing to teach them." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Takes courage to travel this far on your own, or desperation," she murmured, then immediately regretted the admission. Marshal Daniels didn't press, and for that, Gabrielle was grateful. The truth was too raw, too recent. Her father's death. The discovery of his gambling debts. The quiet shame of watching their Boston townhouse and all its contents auctioned to creditors. The teaching position in Montana Territory had been her salvation, offering both employment and escape from the pitying glances of former friends. They approached a modest white clapboard building with a small bell tower. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, facing the vast expanse of prairie that stretched toward distant mountains. "Here we are," Marshal Daniels said, setting her valise down to unlock the door. "School doesn't start for another week, so you'll have time to settle in." The interior was simple but tidy. Rows of benches faced a larger desk at the front. A blackboard covered the wall behind it. A door at the back led to her quarters, a small bedroom with an iron bedstead, a washstand, and a plain wooden dresser. A tiny kitchen with a cast iron stove completed the accommodation. "It's perfect," Gabrielle said, meaning it despite its simplicity. After weeks of uncertainty, having a place of her own, even one this modest, felt like luxury. "Mrs. Hollister at the general store can help you with supplies, Marshal Daniels said, lingering in the doorway. And if you need anything else, my office is just down the street across from the bank. Thank you, Marshal. You've been very kind. He settled his hat back on his head but made no move to leave. Those ladies at the stage stop, they don't speak for everyone in Willow Creek. Most folks here are good people. They just need time to warm up to newcomers. I understand, Gabrielle said, though she wasn't sure she did. In Boston, there had been social hierarchies to navigate, but the rules had been clear. Here, she felt adrift in unfamiliar waters. There's a social at the church Saturday evening, he added. Might be a good way to meet people under better circumstances. I'll consider it, she promised, though the thought of facing those women again made her stomach knot. After the marshal left, Gabrielle sank onto the narrow bed, fatigue washing over her in waves. She should unpack, should explore her new home, but instead she found herself staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Outside her window, Willow Creek continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the newcomer's doubts. Wagons rumbled past, children shouted in play, and somewhere a piano played a jaunty tune. Life in the West moved forward, whether Gabrielle Scott was ready or not. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the Montana sun streaming through the simple calico curtains of Gabrielle's new home. She rose early, determined to make a better impression than yesterday's disastrous arrival. Her trunks wouldn't arrive for another day or two, so she had to make do with what she had packed in her valise. After careful consideration, she chose her most practical outfit, a navy blue walking dress with minimal trimming, serviceable if not fashionable. The street was already busy when Gabrielle stepped out. Riders trotted past, wagons delivered goods to the various businesses, and children darted between buildings, their laughter echoing in the clear mountain air. She squared her shoulders and headed toward the general store, intent on purchasing supplies for her new home. The bell above the door jangled as she entered Hollister's general store. The shop was larger than she had expected, with shelves stretching from floor to ceiling, stocked with everything from foodstuffs to farming equipment. A middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun looked up from behind the counter. "You must be the new schoolmarm," she said, her tone neither friendly nor hostile. "Yes, madam, Gabrielle Scott," she replied, extending her hand. "Marshal Daniels mentioned you might help me with supplies. Meredith Hollister." The woman shook her hand with a firm grip. "Been running this place since my Samuel passed 5 years ago. What do you need?" "Just the basics to start. Some food, lamp oil, perhaps a few cleaning supplies." She glanced around the crowded shop. "And fabric, if you have it. I'd like to make new curtains for the schoolhouse." Mrs. Hollister nodded approvingly. "Got some nice calico, came in last week. Would brighten up that place considerably." As Gabrielle followed the shopkeeper through the aisles, selecting items and discussing prices, the bell jangled again. 3 women entered, their conversation halting abruptly when they spotted Gabrielle. She recognized them from the stagecoach stop. "Morning, ladies," Mrs. Hollister called. "Come to meet our new teacher," the tallest of the 3, a handsome woman in her 30s with auburn hair coiled fashionably beneath a feathered hat, stepped forward. "We've already had the pleasure. I'm Eleanor Hammond, head of the town council's education committee." Her tone made it clear that she considered Gabrielle's appointment a personal affront. The other 2 women, one plump and matronly, the other young with sharp features, watched the interaction with poorly disguised interest. "Pleasure to meet you properly, Mrs. Hammond," Gabrielle said, determined to remain cordial despite the woman's obvious disdain. "Miss Hammond," the woman corrected with a tight smile. "I was engaged once, but he had the good sense to die before we reached the altar." Gabrielle wasn't sure how to respond to such a statement. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Ancient history," Miss Hammond waved dismissively. "What interests me now is your qualifications, Miss Scott. The council received your credentials, of course, but a Boston education doesn't necessarily prepare one for the unique challenges of a frontier classroom." "I assure you I'm quite capable. We shall see," Miss Hammond cut her off. "The children of Willow Creek deserve the very best education we can provide. My father founded this town, you know. The Hammond name means something here." "I'm sure it does," Gabrielle replied, fighting to keep her voice even. "And I intend to honor the trust placed in me by providing an excellent education to every child who enters my classroom." Miss Hammond's eyes narrowed slightly. Bold words, I look forward to seeing them put into action. She turned to her companions. "Come along, ladies, we have committee matters to discuss." With a rustle of skirts and a final appraising glance, the three women moved to the far end of the store, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. "Don't let Eleanor Hammond get under your skin," Mrs. Hollister said quietly as she wrapped Gabrielle's purchases in brown paper. "She's been running this town since her father died, and she doesn't take kindly to new faces, especially pretty ones." Gabrielle felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. "I've dealt with difficult school boards before." "Not like Eleanor, you haven't," Mrs. Hollister warned. "Woman's got a tongue sharp as a Bowie knife and twice as dangerous, but she's all bark mostly, just watch yourself." With her arms full of packages, Gabrielle stepped back onto the boardwalk, grateful for the fresh air after the tense encounter. She had nearly reached the schoolhouse when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from behind. Turning, she saw Marshal Daniels riding toward her on a magnificent chestnut gelding. He reined the horse to a stop beside her. "Morning, Miss Scott. Settling in all right, as well as can be expected," she replied, shifting her packages, "though I seem to have misjudged how much I could carry." In one fluid motion, Wade dismounted and reached for her bundles. "Allow me." "You needn't trouble yourself, Marshal. No trouble at all," he insisted, taking most of her packages. "And please call me Wade. Marshal makes me feel like I should be wearing a badge." "You are wearing a badge," Gabrielle pointed out, a smile tugging at her lips despite her earlier frustration. Wade glanced down at the silver star pinned to his vest and laughed. "So I am. Force of habit, I suppose. Been wearing it so long I forget it's there." They walked side by side toward the schoolhouse, Wade's long stride slowing to match hers. His horse followed obediently, reins dragging in the dust. "I see you met Eleanor Hammond," he said conversationally. Gabrielle sighed. "News travels fast in Willow Creek. Small town." "Everybody knows everybody's business by sundown," Wade confirmed. "Eleanor giving you trouble already?" "Nothing I can't handle," Gabrielle assured him, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. "She seems protective of the school," Wade snorted. "She's protective of her influence." "Eleanor's been the unofficial queen of Willow Creek since her father passed. Doesn't take kindly to anyone who might challenge her authority." "I have no interest in local politics, Marshal Wade," Gabrielle corrected herself. "I just want to teach." "Well, in Eleanor's mind, everything is politics." They reached the schoolhouse, and Wade waited while Gabrielle unlocked the door. Just a friendly warning, she lobbied hard against hiring a teacher from back east, wanted her niece to get the position, though the girl barely finished schooling herself. "That explains the cold reception," Gabrielle murmured, leading the way inside. She cleared a space on her desk for the packages. Wade set down his armload and straightened, his gaze taking in the simple classroom. "Place could use a woman's touch. That's my plan for today. New curtains, a thorough cleaning, perhaps some wildflowers if I can find any nearby. There's a meadow just past the creek with plenty this time of year." He hesitated, then added, "I could show you after lunch if you'd like. Thought you might appreciate a proper tour of the town, too." Gabrielle studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. In Boston, such an offer from an unmarried gentleman would have been considered forward, possibly even improper. But this wasn't Boston, and frontier towns operated by different social codes. "That would be most kind," she finally said. "Though I wouldn't want to keep you from your duties. Town's quiet today. Deputy can handle things for a few hours." His smile was warm, genuine in a way that made her feel immediately at ease. "I'll come by around 1 o'clock if that suits you." After he left, Gabrielle stood in the doorway watching him ride away, the morning sun glinting off his badge. Despite the cool reception from Eleanor Hammond and her cohorts, perhaps Willow Creek held promise after all. True to his word, Wade returned at precisely 1 o'clock, this time on foot. He had exchanged his marshal's coat for a simpler jacket, though the badge remained pinned to his vest. Gabrielle had spent the morning cleaning and arranging her quarters, and had changed into a simpler skirt and shirtwaist for their outing, ready for the grand tour. He asked, offering his arm in a gentlemanly gesture that surprised her. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. Willow Creek proved to be larger than her first impression had suggested. Beyond the main street lay neighborhoods of varying prosperity, from the grand homes on Hammond Hill to the simple cabins where miners and ranch hands lived. Wade seemed to know everyone, tipping his hat to ladies and exchanging greetings with men as they passed. "The town's grown considerably in the last 5 years," he explained as they walked. "Silver strike in the mountains brought the miners, then the railroad came through, bringing more settlers. Got about 500 souls now, give or take. And how long have you been marshal?" Gabrielle asked, genuinely curious about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "Going on 3 years," Wade replied. "Came here after the war, worked as a ranch hand for the Hammond spread for a spell. When the old marshal retired, the town council asked me to step in." He chuckled. "Wasn't my life's ambition, but it suits me well enough." "You fought in the war," Gabrielle couldn't help but ask. She had been just a child when the Civil War ended, but its shadow still loomed large over the nation. Wade's expression sobered. "Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63, fought till Appomattox, not something I talk about much." "I understand," Gabrielle said softly, recognizing the shadow that passed over his features. Her own father had returned from the war a changed man, haunted by memories he refused to share. They had reached the edge of town, where a well-worn path led toward a grove of cottonwoods marking the creek that gave the town its name. Beyond, the promised meadow stretched in a riot of late summer wildflowers, purple asters, golden sunflowers, and delicate blue flax nodding in the gentle breeze. "It's beautiful," Gabrielle breathed, her earlier troubles momentarily forgotten as she took in the vista. "Prettiest spot in the county, if you ask me," Wade agreed. "Good place to come when the town gets too crowded. Does that happen often?" She asked, unable to imagine the small settlement feeling crowded to someone accustomed to its pace. "More often than you'd think." He led her down the path toward the creek. "Especially when you wear a badge, everyone's got a complaint or a problem needs solving." At the creek's edge, Wade helped her across stepping stones worn smooth by years of use. The water gurgled merrily around them, cool and clear from its mountain source. On the other side, the meadow welcomed them with a gentle slope perfect for gathering flowers. Gabrielle moved among the blossoms, selecting the brightest for a bouquet to brighten her new home. Wade watched her for a moment, then joined in, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he plucked purple asters. "Never thought I'd be picking posies," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "The boys down at the saloon would never let me hear the end of it." "Your secret is safe with me, Marshal," Gabrielle promised, returning his smile. In that moment, with the sun warm on her face and wildflowers in her hands, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Their peaceful interlude was interrupted by the distant sound of a church bell tolling urgently. Wade's head snapped up, instantly alert. "That's the alarm bell." Without hesitation, he grabbed Gabrielle's hand and began running back toward the stepping stones. "Stay close," he ordered, all trace of the relaxed companion gone, replaced by the authoritative marshal. They recrossed the creek and hurried up the path toward town. Even before they crested the hill, Gabrielle could see the plume of black smoke rising from somewhere near the main street. "Fire!" Someone shouted as they reached the outskirts. Wade broke into a sprint, Gabrielle struggling to keep up in her practical but still restrictive skirts. The smoke thickened as they neared the source, a 2-story building that housed the town's only hotel on the upper floor and a restaurant below. A bucket brigade had already formed, passing water from the horse trough to the flames licking up the wooden facade. Women were helping guests evacuate, carrying bundles of possessions out onto the street. Children darted about, some helping, others simply watching the excitement with wide eyes. "Peterson," Wade shouted to his deputy, a burly man directing townspeople. "What happened?" "Kitchen fire, Marshal," the deputy reported. Cook says grease caught flame spread to the curtains before they could douse it. Wade immediately took charge, organizing the bucket brigade into 2 lines and directing men to wet down the neighboring buildings to prevent the fire from spreading. Gabrielle, still catching her breath, looked for a way to help. She spotted a young mother with 3 small children, clearly guests of the hotel, standing dazed on the boardwalk with nowhere to go. The woman clutched a baby to her chest while 2 toddlers clung to her skirts, all of them covered in soot. "Madam," Gabrielle approached her, "let me help you. The schoolhouse isn't far and it's safe from the fire." The woman nodded gratefully, too shocked to speak. Gabrielle took one toddler by the hand and instructed the other to hold onto his brother. Together, they made their way through the crowd to the relative calm of the schoolhouse. Over the next hour, Gabrielle's classroom became an impromptu refuge for displaced hotel guests and those whose homes were threatened by the spreading fire. She distributed water, tore strips of clean fabric for bandages, and comforted frightened children. Women from town arrived with food and blankets, working alongside her without question or hesitation. Eleanor Hammond appeared in the doorway, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled from her efforts. She surveyed the organized chaos of the schoolroom with surprise, clearly not expecting to find the new teacher so efficiently managing the crisis. "Miss Scott," she acknowledged with a slight nod, "the fire's under control. Marshal Daniels says the hotel's kitchen and dining room are lost, but they saved the rest of the building and no other structures were damaged." "Thank goodness," Gabrielle replied sincerely. "Any injuries?" "Minor burns, a few cases of smoke inhalation. Doctor Campbell is tending to them at his office." Eleanor hesitated, then added stiffly, "You've done well here." Before Gabrielle could respond to the unexpected compliment, Eleanor had turned and swept back out the door, her back ramrod straight despite her fatigue. By sunset, the fire was completely extinguished. Most of the hotel guests had found alternative accommodations with local families, and only the young mother with 3 children remained at the schoolhouse, having nowhere else to go. "You're welcome to stay here tonight," Gabrielle told her as she helped settle the children on pallets made from blankets. "The bed in my quarters is small, but we can share it." "You're very kind," the woman said softly. She had introduced herself as Sarah Wilson, a widow traveling to Oregon to live with her late husband's brother. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped us." "Anyone would have done the same," Gabrielle demurred, though she was touched by the woman's gratitude. A knock at the door interrupted them. Wade stood there, his face streaked with soot, exhaustion evident in the slump of his broad shoulders. "Checking on you ladies," he said, removing his hat. "Everything all right here? We're managing," Gabrielle assured him. "Mrs. Wilson and her children will stay the night," Wade nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. I've spoken with the hotel owner. He says it'll be at least 2 weeks before the rooms are habitable again." He looked at Sarah. "Madam, the town will cover your expenses until you can continue your journey." "Thank you, Marshal," Sarah replied, clearly relieved. "We don't have much, and what we have was in that hotel room." "Your belongings have been recovered," Wade assured her. "Smoky but salvageable. I'll have them brought over in the morning." He turned back to Gabrielle. "I should let you ladies rest. It's been quite a day." "Indeed it has," Gabrielle agreed, suddenly aware of her own exhaustion. Her hands were grimy, her dress was ruined with soot and torn in places from her dash back to town, and her carefully arranged hair had long since come loose from its pins. Wade hesitated at the door, his eyes lingering on her face. "You were a real blessing today, Miss Scott. Folks noticed how quick you were to help, how you kept your head when others were losing theirs." "I only did what needed doing," she said, embarrassed by his praise. "That's exactly what makes a person valuable in a place like this," he replied seriously. "Doing what needs doing without being asked." He settled his hat back on his head. "Good night, ladies." After he left, Gabrielle helped Sarah put the children to bed, then washed up as best she could with the limited water in her quarters. As she finally lay down beside the exhausted young widow, she reflected on the day's events. The fire had been terrible, but somehow, in the midst of crisis, She had found her place in this community more quickly than she could have imagined. With that comforting thought, Gabrielle drifted into an exhausted sleep, the scent of smoke and wildflowers mingling in her dreams. The week following the fire transformed Gabrielle's standing in Willow Creek. Where before she had been viewed with suspicion as an outsider, now she received nods of recognition and friendly greetings as she walked down the street. Her quick thinking during the emergency had earned her a measure of respect that might otherwise have taken months to establish. Even Eleanor Hammond's attitude had shifted subtly. When she visited the schoolhouse to inspect Gabrielle's preparations for the upcoming term, her criticism was less pointed, her demands more reasonable. "The children will need to be properly evaluated on their first day," Eleanor instructed as she examined the new curtains Gabrielle had sewn. "Some have had consistent schooling, others barely any at all. I've prepared assessments for different levels," Gabrielle assured her, showing the carefully written tests she had created. "I plan to group students by ability rather than age for certain subjects." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's actually quite sensible. The last teacher insisted on strict age groupings, which left some children perpetually behind. Every child learns differently," Gabrielle said, warming to her subject. "In Boston, I found that flexible groupings allowed students to progress at their own pace while still being challenged." "I suppose even Boston has some worthwhile ideas," Eleanor conceded, which from her was high praise indeed. By the time school was set to begin the following Monday, Gabrielle felt cautiously optimistic about her prospects in Willow Creek. The schoolhouse gleamed with fresh polish, new books lined the shelves ordered at Eleanor's insistence and the town council's expense, and 37 children had been registered for attendance. The Saturday before the school term began, the town held its monthly social at the church. Gabrielle had nearly forgotten Wade's mention of it that first day, but a reminder came in the form of Mrs. Hollister. "You'll be attending tonight, of course," the shopkeeper said when Gabrielle stopped by for supplies that morning. "I hadn't given it much thought," Gabrielle admitted. "I still have preparations to complete for Monday." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister declared. "Every unmarried person in town will be there and half the married ones too. Best chance you'll have to meet the parents of your students before they're sitting in your classroom." She had a point, Gabrielle realized. It would be advantageous to meet families in a social setting first. "What's the appropriate attire for such an event?" Mrs. Hollister considered for a moment. "Your Sunday best would do, though nothing too fancy." "Folks here dress up, but not like back east, I'd imagine," which presented a problem as Gabrielle's trunk still hadn't arrived. She had been making do with the few garments from her valise, washing them out each night and wearing them again the next day. None were suitable for a social gathering. Her concern must have shown on her face, for Mrs. Hollister leaned across the counter conspiratorially. "I might have something that would suit. My daughter left some dresses behind when she married and moved to Helena. She's about your size, I'd say." "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister cut her off. "They're just gathering dust in my attic. Be glad for someone to make use of them." She shooed Gabrielle toward the back of the store. "Come along, let's see what might fit." An hour later, Gabrielle left the general store with her supplies and a carefully wrapped package containing a sky blue dress that Mrs. Hollister insisted brought out her eyes. The shopkeeper had refused payment, saying only that Gabrielle could return the favor by giving extra attention to her grandson, who has more energy than sense when it comes to his letters. The social began at 7, after the heat of the day had subsided. Gabrielle arrived promptly, having spent more time on her appearance than she had in months. The blue dress fit surprisingly well, needing only minor adjustments at the waist, which she had made that afternoon. She had arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, with a few curls framing her face and the rest pinned up in a neat chignon. The church's meeting hall had been transformed with lanterns and wildflower arrangements. A small group of musicians played lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined the opposite wall. Already the room was filling with townspeople, the women in their finest dresses, the men in clean shirts and freshly polished boots. Gabrielle hesitated in the doorway, suddenly self-conscious. In Boston, she had attended countless social events, but there she had known the rules, the expectations. Here, she felt adrift again. "Miss Scott," a familiar voice called. Sarah Wilson approached, looking transformed from the soot-covered, exhausted woman of a few days ago. She wore a simple brown dress, mended in places but clean and pressed. "I was hoping you would come, Mrs. Wilson," Gabrielle greeted her warmly. "You look well." "Have you and the children settled in somewhere comfortable?" Sarah nodded. "The dressmaker had a room to let above her shop. It's small, but it suits us until we can continue our journey." She lowered her voice. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness during the fire." The children still talk about the nice teacher who gave them cookies while the town was burning. "It was nothing," Gabrielle assured her. "I'm just glad everyone was safe in the end." "Not nothing to us," Sarah insisted. She glanced around the room, then added, "I should warn you, you've become something of a topic of conversation. The single ladies aren't too pleased that Marshal Daniels has been calling on you." "Calling on me," Gabrielle repeated, confused. "He's merely been helping me settle in." Sarah's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe this explanation for a moment. "Well, whatever you call it, he's headed this way now, and at least 3 young women are watching with daggers in their eyes." Before Gabrielle could respond, Wade appeared beside them, looking so different from his usual appearance that she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the dust-covered marshal's coat, replaced by a well-cut dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His wheat-colored hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved, revealing a strong jawline usually hidden beneath stubble. "Evening, ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "Mrs. Wilson, good to see you recovering from your ordeal." He turned to Gabrielle, his blue eyes warming appreciatively as they took in her appearance. "Miss Scott, you look lovely tonight." "Thank you, Marshal," Gabrielle replied, inexplicably flustered by the compliment. "You clean up rather well yourself," Wade grinned. "Don't get much occasion to wear the fancy duds. Church on Sundays, socials once a month, funerals when we can't avoid them." He offered his arm. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" Gabrielle hesitated, aware of the eyes watching them. "I'm not familiar with the dances out here." "Not so different from back east, I'd imagine," Wade assured her. "And if you step on my toes, I promise not to arrest you for assault on an officer of the law." His teasing broke through her reserve, and she laughed, placing her hand on his offered arm. "In that case, how can I refuse?" He led her to the center of the room, where several couples were already moving to the lively fiddle music. Wade proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her through the steps with gentle pressure on her waist and hand. "I confess, I didn't expect a frontier marshal to be so accomplished on the dance floor," Gabrielle remarked as they circled the room. "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly," Wade explained, deftly spinning her under his arm. "Said a man who couldn't dance wasn't fit for civilized company." "A wise woman," Gabrielle approved. "You mentioned brothers, 2 older, 1 younger, all back in Pennsylvania running the family lumber business." His expression grew wistful for a moment. "Haven't seen them since '68. "That's a long time to be away from family," Gabrielle said softly. Wade shrugged, the movement rippling through his shoulders. "West gets in your blood. Hard to imagine going back east now." He studied her face. "Do you miss it? Boston?" Gabrielle considered the question honestly. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, the sense of history in every cobblestone." She glanced around the simple church hall at the people laughing and talking. "But there's something authentic about life here, less artifice, more substance." "Well put," Wade nodded approvingly. "Takes most Easterners years to see that, if they ever do." The music ended, and couples around them broke apart, clapping for the musicians. Wade kept his hand at the small of Gabrielle's back as he guided her toward the refreshment table. He poured her a cup of punch, their fingers brushing as he handed it to her. "Marshal Daniels," a stern voice interrupted the moment. "A word, if you please." Eleanor Hammond stood nearby, her expression unreadable. Beside her was a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 60s, his silver hair contrasting sharply with his black suit. "Judge," Wade acknowledged with a nod. Didn't expect to see you back from the circuit so soon. Finished earlier than anticipated, the judge replied. Miss Hammond was just informing me about the fire and your handling of it. Just doing my job, sir, Wade said modestly. He turned to include Gabrielle in the conversation. Judge Porter, may I present Miss Gabrielle Scott, our new school teacher. Miss Scott, Judge William Porter presides over the Territorial Circuit Court. A pleasure, Miss Scott, the judge said, his handshake firm. I understand you were quite instrumental during the emergency. I merely offered shelter to those displaced, Gabrielle demurred, uncomfortable with the praise. Modesty is a virtue, but so is acknowledging one's contributions, Judge Porter said with a small smile. The education of our youth is a sacred trust. I'm pleased to see Willow Creek has found someone equal to the task. Eleanor's lips thinned at this endorsement, but she said nothing. Gabrielle suspected that Judge Porter's opinion carried significant weight in town affairs, perhaps even outweighing Eleanor's influence. If you'll excuse us, the judge continued, I need to borrow the marshal for a moment to discuss official business. Wade looked reluctant to leave Gabrielle's side but nodded. Of course, Judge. Miss Scott, save me another dance. I shall, Gabrielle promised, watching as the two men moved toward a quieter corner of the hall. Left alone with Eleanor, Gabrielle braced herself for another frosty exchange. To her surprise, Eleanor's next words were almost conciliatory. That dress becomes you, she said, examining the blue fabric with a critical eye. Meredith Hollister's work, I presume. Her daughter's, actually, Gabrielle admitted. Mrs. Hollister kindly lent it to me until my trunks arrive. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Sensible solution. Appearance matters in a small community like ours, especially for those in positions of authority. I'm beginning to understand that, Gabrielle said carefully. Are you? Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Then perhaps you'll also understand why I'm concerned about your association with Marshal Daniels. We're barely acquaintances, Gabrielle protested, though even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. Appearances suggest otherwise, Eleanor countered. A schoolteacher must be above reproach in all aspects of her life. The children look to you as an example of proper behavior, as does the community. I assure you, Miss Hammond, my conduct has been entirely appropriate. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then sighed. I believe you mean that, but you're new here, unfamiliar with frontier ways. What might seem innocent in Boston could be considered scandalous in Willow Creek. Before Gabrielle could defend herself further, they were interrupted by the arrival of several parents eager to meet their children's new teacher. Eleanor excused herself gracefully, leaving Gabrielle to field questions about curriculum and expectations. For the next hour, she barely had a moment to herself, moving from one introduction to the next. She was just taking a much-needed breath of fresh air on the church porch when Wade found her again. He looked troubled, his earlier good humor dimmed by whatever the judge had discussed with him. Everything all right? Gabrielle asked. Wade leaned against the porch railing, his posture tense. Judge brought news of trouble brewing. Gang of outlaws hit a settlement north of here last week, killed 2 men, took everything of value. How terrible, Gabrielle said, genuinely distressed. Do they think the gang might come this way? It's possible, Wade admitted. Willow Creek's got the bank, the assay office, more tempting targets than most places nearby. He straightened, visibly setting aside his concerns. But that's not your worry, and this is supposed to be a social occasion. I believe you promised me another dance. So I did, Gabrielle agreed, allowing him to guide her back inside. As they rejoined the festivities, she couldn't help but notice the speculative glances cast their way, some approving, others decidedly less so. The music struck up again, this time a slower waltz. Wade drew her closer than before, his hand warm and steady at her waist. As they moved in perfect time to the music, Gabrielle found herself more aware of him than she had been of any man in years, the clean scent of his shaving soap, the faint roughness of his palm against her gloved hand, the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips where they rested on his shoulder. People are watching, she murmured, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Let them, Wade replied, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard. Nothing improper about a dance. Miss Hammond seems to think otherwise, Gabrielle confessed. She warned me about my association with you. Wade's jaw tightened. Eleanor Hammond needs to mind her own business. She considers the school her business, Gabrielle pointed out, and by extension, the teacher's reputation. Your reputation is impeccable, Wade insisted, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me. The protectiveness in his voice stirred something within Gabrielle, something she hadn't felt since before her father's death and the collapse of her former life. It was dangerous, this fluttering in her chest, this warmth that spread through her at his touch. She had come to Willow Creek to rebuild her life, not to complicate it with feelings for a man she barely knew. Yet, as the waltz ended and Wade reluctantly released her, Gabrielle couldn't deny the connection between them, nor her desire to explore it further. The question was whether such an exploration would strengthen her new beginnings in Willow Creek, or destroy them before they truly began. The first day of school arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold. Gabrielle had been awake since before dawn, too nervous to sleep, reviewing her lesson plans and arranging her classroom one final time. She wore her most professional outfit, a high-necked shirtwaist in crisp white with a tailored gray skirt, her hair neatly coiled at the nape of her neck. By 8 o'clock, children began arriving, some alone, others accompanied by parents eager to make a good impression on the new teacher. Gabrielle greeted each one with a warm smile and a firm handshake, matching names to faces and noting family connections for future reference. The classroom filled quickly, a sea of expectant faces ranging from solemn 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers in their final year of schooling. Gabrielle surveyed them all, her initial nervousness giving way to the familiar sense of purpose that had drawn her to teaching in the first place. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I am Miss Scott, and I am honored to be your teacher." From that moment, the day took on a rhythm of its own. Gabrielle administered her assessments, gauging each student's abilities in reading, arithmetic, and writing. She established classroom rules, assigned seats based on both age and ability, and began the process of building relationships with each child. By noon, when she dismissed them for the lunch hour, Gabrielle felt cautiously optimistic. The children seemed eager to learn, if somewhat rough around the edges in their academic preparation. Even Eleanor Hammond's nephew, a serious boy of 12 with his aunt's penetrating gaze, had shown promise despite his initial skepticism of the Eastern lady teacher. Gabrielle was tidying her desk when a knock at the door interrupted her solitude. Wade stood in the doorway, holding his hat in his hands and looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "Thought I'd check how your first morning went." "Very well, thank you," Gabrielle replied, pleased by his thoughtfulness. "The children are quite bright, though their previous instruction has been inconsistent." Wade stepped inside, glancing around at the now empty classroom. "Looks like you've got it well in hand." He hesitated, then added, "Actually had another reason for stopping by, wanted to apologize for Saturday night." "Apologize?" Gabrielle echoed, confused. "Whatever for?" "For putting you in an awkward position with Eleanor and the others," Wade clarified. "Wasn't thinking about how it might look, my paying such obvious attention to you." "Oh." Gabrielle wasn't sure whether to be touched by his consideration or disappointed that he regretted their time together. "There's no need for apology. I enjoyed our dances very much." "As did I," Wade assured her quickly. "Too much, maybe, which is the problem." He moved closer, his blue eyes intent on her face. "Truth is, Miss Scott, Gabrielle, if I may, I find myself thinking about you far more than is probably proper for a woman in your position." The frankness of his admission took her breath away. In Boston, such a declaration would have come only after months of carefully chaperoned visits and parental approval. Here in Willow Creek, apparently, a man spoke his mind directly. "Marshal Daniels," she began, then softened her tone. "Wade. I'm flattered by your interest, truly, but I've only just arrived in Willow Creek. My position is still new, my reputation not yet established. I can't afford to give the town gossips more fuel." Wade nodded, accepting her reasoning even as disappointment flickered across his features. "I understand, your career comes first, as it should." He took a step back, restoring a more proper distance between them. "Still, I hope we can be friends at least." "I would like that very much," Gabrielle said sincerely. The sound of children's voices approaching signaled the end of the lunch hour. "I should prepare for the afternoon session." "Of course." Wade settled his hat back on his head, tipping it slightly. "Good day, Miss Scott." As he left, Gabrielle found herself both relieved and strangely bereft. Wade's honesty had been refreshing, his interest flattering. In another time, another place, she might have welcomed his attention openly. But here, now, with her future hanging in the balance of the town's approval, she couldn't risk alienating influential figures like Eleanor Hammond. The afternoon passed in a blur of lessons and introductions. By the time the last student departed, Gabrielle was exhausted but exhilarated. She had survived her first day as Willow Creek's teacher, and by all measures, it had been a success. She was just locking the schoolhouse door when she noticed a group of women approaching from the direction of town. Eleanor Hammond led the procession, flanked by the same two women who had been with her at the general store. Behind them came several others, all dressed in their afternoon visiting clothes. "Miss Scott," Eleanor called as they drew near. "A moment of your time, if you please." Gabrielle suppressed a sigh. Whatever this was about, it couldn't be good. "Of course, Miss Hammond. How may I help you ladies?" "The Women's Improvement Society has its weekly meeting today," Eleanor explained, indicating the group behind her. "We thought it appropriate to extend an invitation to you, as education is one of our primary concerns." The invitation was unexpected, and Gabrielle suspected it was not entirely voluntary. Still, joining the society would give her valuable connections within the community. "I'm honored," she replied carefully. "When and where do you meet?" "Now, at my home," Eleanor said. "We've already had refreshments prepared, unless you have other commitments this afternoon." The question held a subtle challenge. "No other commitments," Gabrielle assured her. "Lead the way." Eleanor's home proved to be the grandest in Willow Creek, a two-story brick mansion set on a hill overlooking the town. Inside, the furnishings were elaborate by frontier standards: imported carpets, velvet draperies, and mahogany furniture that must have cost a small fortune to transport from the East. The women gathered in a formal parlor, arranged in a circle of chairs as if for a court-martial rather than a social meeting. Gabrielle was given the seat directly opposite Eleanor, clearly the position of scrutiny. "Ladies, as you know, we traditionally begin with committee reports," Eleanor said once everyone was settled. "However, today I thought we might first give Miss Scott the opportunity to share her vision for our school." Put on the spot, Gabrielle nevertheless rose to the occasion. She outlined her educational philosophy, emphasizing practical knowledge alongside classical studies, and her hope to expand the school's library and perhaps eventually add a science laboratory for older students. "Ambitious plans," Eleanor commented when she finished. "And the cost of such improvements?" "I've prepared a detailed budget," Gabrielle replied, having anticipated this question. "Some items would require town funding, but many could be achieved through community efforts: book donations, volunteer labor for shelving and equipment." The other women looked impressed by her thoroughness. Even Eleanor seemed grudgingly approving. "Well thought out," she conceded. "The society will consider which aspects we might support." The meeting continued with reports on various community projects: a new roof for the church, care packages for homesteaders in outlying areas, plans for the Harvest Festival in October. Gabrielle listened attentively, offering suggestions when appropriate but mostly observing the group dynamics. It became clear that while Eleanor was nominally the president, there were factions within the society. The older women deferred to her without question, but several younger members exchanged glances when her pronouncements grew particularly autocratic. By the time tea and cake were served, Gabrielle had identified potential allies among the group. Mrs. Hollister, unsurprisingly, was one. The doctor's wife, a gentlewoman named Catherine Campbell, was another, asking thoughtful questions about educational methods for different learning abilities. The most unexpected support came from Beatrice Porter, Judge Porter's daughter-in-law, who had remained quiet until Eleanor began questioning Gabrielle about her Eastern notions of proper curriculum. "I think Miss Scott's ideas have considerable merit," Beatrice interjected smoothly. "My husband attended Williams College, and he often remarks that students from rural areas are at a disadvantage in higher education due to inconsistent primary schooling." Eleanor's lips thinned at this contradiction, but she could hardly argue with the judge's family. "Perhaps so, but few of our students will attend college. Most need practical skills for life in the West. Which is why a balanced approach is best," Gabrielle suggested diplomatically. "Classical education provides critical thinking skills useful in any setting, while practical studies prepare students for immediate needs." Several women nodded approval at this compromise. Eleanor, recognizing that she was losing ground, abruptly changed the subject to the upcoming Harvest Festival. When the meeting finally concluded, Gabrielle found herself surrounded by society members, each wanting a private word about their children's education or offering assistance with school projects. Eleanor watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. As Gabrielle prepared to leave, Catherine Campbell fell into step beside her. "You handled that remarkably well," she said quietly. "Eleanor was testing you and you passed with flying colors." "It felt more like a trial than a meeting," Gabrielle admitted. Catherine laughed softly. "That's Eleanor's way. She likes to establish dominance early, but don't worry, she's not as powerful as she thinks. Times are changing, even in Willow Creek." "I'm beginning to see that," Gabrielle replied thoughtfully. They had reached the front porch when Eleanor appeared in the doorway behind them. "Miss Scott, a final word." Catherine squeezed Gabrielle's arm in silent support, then continued down the path, leaving the two women alone. "You made quite an impression today," Eleanor said, studying Gabrielle with new respect. "The women like you despite my reservations." "I'm glad to hear it," Gabrielle replied cautiously. "I hope we can work together for the benefit of the school. That remains to be seen." Eleanor straightened her already perfect posture. "I noticed Marshal Daniels visiting the schoolhouse at noon. I trust you remembered our conversation about appearances." So that was it. Eleanor, or one of her informants, had observed Wade's visit. "The marshal merely stopped by to inquire about the first day of classes," Gabrielle said truthfully. "As the town's law enforcement officer, he has a vested interest in the welfare of the school." "Indeed." Eleanor's tone made it clear she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, as long as his interest remains professional, there should be no cause for concern." The implication was clear. Eleanor was watching, and she expected Gabrielle to maintain strict propriety in her interactions with Wade. Any hint of impropriety could jeopardize her position as teacher. "I understand completely," Gabrielle assured her, maintaining her composure despite the unfairness of the situation. "Good evening, Miss Hammond." As she walked back toward town in the gathering dusk, Gabrielle wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, her first day of teaching had gone well, and she had made inroads with the Women's Improvement Society. On the other, Eleanor's warning about Wade had reinforced the precariousness of her position in Willow Creek. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the rider approaching until he was nearly upon her. Wade reined his horse to a walk beside her, concern evident in his expression. "Bit late to be walking alone, Miss Scott," he said, his tone more formal than usual, likely for the benefit of any observers. "May I escort you back to town?" Gabrielle hesitated, torn between practical safety and Eleanor's warning. But the road was growing dark, and she was still a quarter-mile from the schoolhouse. "Thank you, Marshal," she said finally, accepting his outstretched hand and allowing him to pull her up behind him on the saddle. They rode in silence for a moment, Gabrielle trying to maintain a proper distance despite the intimacy of sharing a saddle. "Meeting with the Improvement Society go well?" Wade asked eventually. "As well as could be expected," Gabrielle replied, choosing her words carefully. "Miss Hammond has strong opinions about education." "Among other things," Wade agreed dryly. Don't let her intimidate you. Eleanor's bark is worse than her bite most days. And the other days, Wade chuckled, the sound vibrating through his back where Gabrielle's hands rested lightly. On those days, even I make myself scarce. They reached the schoolhouse and Wade dismounted first, then offered his hand to help Gabrielle down. The brief contact sent a now familiar warmth through her, one she struggled to ignore. "Thank you for the ride," she said, stepping back to a respectable distance. "It was most kind." Wade studied her face in the fading light. "You're keeping your distance," he observed, his perception uncomfortably accurate. "Eleanor said something, didn't she?" Gabrielle sighed, seeing no point in denial. "She expressed concern about appearances, yes, and you're worried about your position." It wasn't a question. Wade ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "I won't pretend I don't understand. Your career matters, and Eleanor has influence with the school board. It's not fair," Gabrielle admitted, "but it's the reality I face. Female teachers are held to different standards than their male counterparts. Or marshals," Wade agreed ruefully. "No one questions my reputation when I call on the widow Anderson to check on her fence repairs, but let me escort the schoolteacher home, and tongues start wagging." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Gabrielle found herself smiling at his assessment. "Precisely," Wade's expression softened. "I meant what I said earlier about wanting to be friends. No expectations beyond that unless until you decide otherwise." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "I would like that very much," Gabrielle said softly. "Good night, Marshal Daniels. Good night, Miss Scott." He tipped his hat, then mounted his horse and rode away, his silhouette gradually fading into the gathering darkness. Inside her quarters, Gabrielle lit the lamp and prepared a simple supper, her mind still dwelling on the day's events. She had navigated her first day of teaching, survived Eleanor Hammond's interrogation, and established boundaries with Wade that preserved both her reputation and the possibility of something more in the future. All in all, not bad for a Boston schoolteacher's first fortnight in the Wild West. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Gabrielle's days were filled with teaching, her evenings with grading papers and preparing lessons. She joined the choir at the small Episcopal church, attended Women's Improvement Society meetings regularly, and gradually became a familiar figure in Willow Creek. True to his word, Wade maintained a respectful distance in public, limiting their interactions to casual greetings when they passed on the street or formal exchanges during his occasional visits to the school. But Gabrielle was acutely aware of his presence whenever they were in the same room, drawn to his quiet strength and unwavering integrity. October brought the Harvest Festival, a community celebration that transformed the town square into a fairground complete with contests, music, and enough food to feed 3 counties. Children were excused from school for the day, and the entire town turned out in their finest clothes. Gabrielle, at Eleanor's request, found herself in charge of the children's spelling competition. She stood on a makeshift platform, calling out words of increasing difficulty as young contestants either spelled triumphantly or slouched away in defeat. "Magnificent," she pronounced clearly to 12-year-old Thomas Hammond, Eleanor's nephew and one of her brightest students. "Magnificent," Thomas spelled confidently, shooting a smug glance at his remaining competitor, 10-year-old Emma Campbell. "Correct," Gabrielle confirmed. "Emma, your word is physician." The girl twisted a dark braid nervously around her finger. "Physician," she spelled slowly, then broke into a relieved smile when Gabrielle nodded approval. The contest continued, the words growing more challenging with each round. A small crowd had gathered to watch, parents and townspeople cheering for their favorites. Gabrielle spotted Wade at the back, his tall frame easily visible above most heads. He caught her eye and smiled, a small, private gesture that sent warmth through her despite the autumn chill. Finally, after 20 rounds, Thomas misspelled bureaucracy, and Emma correctly spelled chrysanthemum to win the competition. Gabrielle presented her with the prize, a leather-bound copy of Little Women, and dismissed the contestants with congratulations all around. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor approached the platform, her nephew trailing behind with a sullen expression. "An interesting selection of words, Miss Scott," she remarked. "Some might say unnecessarily difficult for children of this age." "I believe in challenging my students, Miss Hammond," Gabrielle replied evenly. "Thomas performed admirably, as did Emma. Both should be proud." Eleanor's gaze shifted to where Dr. and Mrs. Campbell were congratulating their daughter. Indeed. Well, the competition certainly kept the audience engaged. She straightened her shawl with practiced precision. "The pie judging begins at 3. I trust we'll see you there." "I wouldn't miss it," Gabrielle assured her. She had entered her apple pie in the competition, following her grandmother's recipe with careful attention to detail. As Eleanor moved away, Wade approached, his badge gleaming against his vest. "Quite a showdown," he commented, nodding toward the departing contestants. "Thought young Thomas might burst a blood vessel when he missed that last word." "He's not accustomed to coming in second," Gabrielle agreed. "It's good for him, though he might not see it that way just now." "His aunt certainly doesn't," Wade observed wryly. "Never seen Eleanor look so sour outside of town council meetings." Gabrielle laughed despite herself. "You're terrible." "Honest," Wade corrected with a grin. "Different thing entirely." He glanced around at the festive scene, then back at her. "Been meaning to ask, would you do me the honor of sitting with me at the bonfire tonight? As friends," he added hastily. "Strictly proper, in full view of the entire town." The bonfire was the culmination of the Harvest Festival, where the community gathered to share stories, sing songs, and celebrate the season's bounty. Couples often sat together, but so did families and friends. "I'd like that," Gabrielle decided, throwing caution to the wind. "As friends." Wade's smile brightened his entire face. "I'll save you a spot." He tipped his hat and moved away to resume his duties, leaving Gabrielle with a flutter of anticipation in her chest. The remainder of the day passed in a whirl of activities. Gabrielle's pie won second place in the competition, Mrs. Hollister's peach pie claimed first, to no one's surprise. She tried her hand at horseshoe pitching with limited success, and she cheered as her students competed in sack races and apple bobbing contests. As dusk fell, the townspeople gathered in the field behind the church, where a massive pile of logs and branches awaited the traditional lighting. Judge Porter, as the senior official present, was given the honor of setting the first torch to the pyre. Flames leaped skyward, casting a golden glow over the assembled crowd and sending sparks dancing into the darkening sky. Gabrielle found Wade waiting near the edge of the gathering, a blanket spread on the ground and 2 cups of hot cider ready. He had shed his marshal's coat in favor of a simple flannel shirt, though the badge remained pinned to his chest. "Ever off duty, Marshal?" Gabrielle asked as she settled beside him, careful to maintain a respectable distance. Wade handed her a cup of cider. "Not entirely. Sheriff's got the night watch in the town proper, but I like to keep an eye on things out here. Folks get rowdy sometimes, especially after the apple brandy makes its rounds." "I'm shocked, sir," Gabrielle teased. "Alcohol at a community event." "Officially prohibited," Wade confirmed with a straight face. "Unofficially, what the marshal doesn't see, he can't report," she laughed, relaxing into the companionable atmosphere. Around the massive fire, families and friends were settling in for an evening of entertainment. Children roasted apples on long sticks. Young couples sat close together under the watchful eyes of parents, and older residents claimed the few chairs that had been brought out for their comfort. "It's beautiful," Gabrielle said softly, watching the flames paint everything in shades of gold and amber. "Like something from a storybook." "Does feel that way sometimes," Wade agreed, his voice equally quiet. "Easy to forget the world beyond our little valley." The world beyond had seemed very distant in recent weeks. Gabrielle seldom thought of Boston anymore, except when writing her monthly letters to her mother's cousin, who had taken the older woman in after the family's financial collapse. Her life was here now, among these people, in this place that was beginning to feel like home. The evening's entertainment began with music, fiddles, guitars, and a harmonica playing lively tunes that had feet tapping and hands clapping. Later came the storytelling, with old-timers sharing tales of the early days of Willow Creek, of harsh winters and Indian encounters, of gold strikes and cattle drives. "Marshal, give us a song," someone called from across the fire when there was a lull in the proceedings. Wade shook his head, clearly embarrassed. "Not tonight, Jenkins, throat's too dry." "Nonsense," the man persisted. "Miss Scott wants to hear you sing, don't you, madam?" Put on the spot, Gabrielle could only nod, curious about this hidden talent. "See there." "Can't disappoint the lady," Jenkins pressed, to murmurs of agreement from the crowd. With a resigned sigh, Wade got to his feet. "One song, then I'm done," he warned, accepting a guitar from one of the musicians. He settled the instrument comfortably against his chest, fingers finding the strings with practiced ease. After a moment's consideration, he began to play, a gentle melody that Gabrielle didn't recognize. When he started to sing, his rich baritone carried clearly in the night air. The song was a ballad of longing and hope, of a traveler far from home who finds unexpected love in a strange land. Wade's eyes found Gabrielle's across the firelight, and though he sang to the entire gathering, she felt each word as if it were meant for her alone. When the final notes faded, a hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then, as if emerging from a spell, they erupted in applause. Wade acknowledged it with a nod, returned the guitar to its owner, and made his way back to Gabrielle's side. "That was beautiful," she said softly when he settled beside her again. "You never mentioned you could sing like that," Wade shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "Just something I picked up along the way. My mother taught us all music, said it civilized the soul." "She was right," Gabrielle murmured, deeply moved by his performance. "Thank you for sharing it." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Across the fire, Eleanor Hammond watched with narrowed eyes, her disapproval evident even at a distance. But for once, Gabrielle found she didn't care. This connection with Wade felt right, felt true in a way that transcended the town's gossip and Eleanor's machinations. As the evening wore on, the crowd gradually thinned, families with young children departing first, then the elderly, until only the hardiest revelers remained. The bonfire had burned down to a glowing mound of embers, casting just enough light to see by. "I should walk you home," Wade said eventually, reluctance clear in his voice. "It's getting late." "Yes, I suppose it is," Gabrielle agreed, equally reluctant to end the evening. They walked slowly through the sleeping town, the wooden boardwalks quiet beneath their feet. The stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright and numerous in the clear mountain air. Neither spoke, content in the companionable silence that had grown between them. At the schoolhouse door, Gabrielle turned to face him. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Wade." "The pleasure was mine," he replied softly. In the silver moonlight, his features were cast in shadow, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Gabrielle, her name on his lips, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. "Yes." "I've been thinking," he began, then hesitated. "That is, I've been wondering if you might consider." A shout from the direction of town interrupted him, followed by the sound of running feet. Wade turned sharply, hand automatically moving to the revolver at his hip. "Marshal." A young man skidded to a halt before them, breathless with exertion. "Marshal, you're needed at the bank. Mr. Fulton says someone's been trying to break in the back window." Wade's expression shifted instantly from the warm companion of moments before to the alert lawman. "Stay inside, lock your doors," he instructed Gabrielle. "I'll check on you when this is resolved." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding rapidly toward the bank with the messenger at his heels. Gabrielle watched until they disappeared around a corner, then entered the schoolhouse, securing the door as instructed. Sleep proved elusive that night as she waited for word from Wade. Around midnight, a soft knock finally came. Wrapping a shawl around her nightdress, Gabrielle opened the door to find him standing there, weariness etched in every line of his face. "You should be asleep," he said by way of greeting. "I was worried," she admitted. "What happened?" "Attempted robbery," Wade replied. "Two men, strangers in town, might be connected to that gang I mentioned before. They ran when Fulton raised the alarm, but we found evidence they'd been scouting the place for days." Did you catch them? Wade shook his head grimly. Lost their trail at the river. Sheriff's organizing a search party for First Light. He rubbed a hand across his face, the gesture revealing his exhaustion. Just wanted to let you know you're safe. We'll have men patrolling the town tonight. Thank you, Gabrielle said softly. You should rest. You look dead on your feet. A tired smile briefly lightened his expression. Kind assessment. Feel worse, truth be told. He straightened, summoning his professional demeanor. Keep your doors locked, stay vigilant. This may not be over. I will, she promised. Be careful, Wade. His expression softened at her concern. Always am. He touched the brim of his hat in a weary salute, then turned to go, his shoulders squared despite his fatigue. Gabrielle watched until he disappeared into the darkness, her heart heavy with a new worry. The safe, idyllic Willow Creek of recent weeks suddenly seemed more fragile, more vulnerable than she had imagined. And Wade, by virtue of his position, stood directly in harm's way. Returning to bed, she found her thoughts in turmoil. The evening had brought her to the brink of acknowledging her feelings for Wade, only to be interrupted by this stark reminder of the dangers inherent in his profession. Could she open her heart to a man whose duty might take him from her at any moment? Was she brave enough for such a love? Dawn found her still awake, watching the first pale light creep across her ceiling, these questions still unanswered. The attempted bank robbery cast a shadow over Willow Creek in the days that followed. Wade and the county sheriff organized patrols, questioned strangers, and dispatched telegrams to neighboring towns warning of the potential threat. Gabrielle continued her teaching duties as usual, but with a new awareness of the dangers that lurked beyond the valley's peaceful facade. A week after the incident, as Gabrielle was dismissing her students for the day, she noticed an unusual commotion in the street. People were hurrying toward the main square, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. She followed, drawn by the same impulse. A crowd had gathered outside the marshal's office. Through the press of bodies, Gabrielle could see Wade standing on the boardwalk, addressing the townspeople with Sheriff Collins at his side. She edged closer to hear his words. Confirmed reports that the Blackwell gang was spotted in Sweetwater yesterday, Wade was saying, his expression grave. For those who don't know, this is the same group suspected of robberies and murders throughout the territory over the past month. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Blackwell gang had a fearsome reputation, having left a trail of violence across 3 territories. Sheriff Collins and I are implementing additional security measures, Wade continued, his voice steady and reassuring. We've requested assistance from the territorial marshals, but until they arrive, we'll need volunteers for night patrols. Several men immediately stepped forward, including Dr. Campbell and Judge Porter's son, a lawyer who had recently returned from his circuit. Wade acknowledged them with a nod of thanks. What about our families? A woman called from the crowd. Are we safe in our homes? We believe the gang's primary target is the bank, Sheriff Collins answered. But as a precaution, we recommend securing your valuables and maintaining vigilance. Travel in groups when possible and report any suspicious activity immediately. The meeting continued with specific instructions for the volunteers and reassurances for the worried townspeople. Gabrielle remained at the edge of the crowd, her concern growing with each detail revealed. The Blackwell gang was not a simple group of thieves, they were ruthless killers who had left no survivors in their last 2 raids. As the crowd began to disperse, Wade caught sight of Gabrielle. He made his way to her side, his expression softening slightly despite the gravity of the situation. Didn't mean to frighten folks, he said quietly, but they need to know the danger. You did what was necessary, Gabrielle assured him. Is it really as serious as it sounds? Wade glanced around, then lowered his voice further. Worse, maybe. Got a telegram from the territorial marshal this morning. Blackwell's gang killed a family outside Sweetwater, man, wife, 2 children. Didn't take anything of value, just killed them for being in the wrong place. Horror washed over Gabrielle at the thought of such senseless violence. Dear God. Yeah, Wade's jaw tightened. That's why I need you to be extra careful. Schools on the edge of town, isolated, might be best to stay with someone in town proper for a few days. I can't abandon the schoolhouse, Gabrielle protested. Everything I own is there and I have responsibilities. Your safety matters more than possessions, Wade argued. Mrs. Campbell already offered to take you in. Their house is near my office, easier to protect. Gabrielle considered the request, torn between her independent nature and the genuine concern in Wade's eyes. What about my students? Should I suspend classes? For now, continue as normal, Wade decided after a moment's thought. But dismiss them early before dusk and accept Catherine Campbell's offer. Please, he added, the word carrying more weight than all his previous arguments. Very well, Gabrielle conceded. For a few days until the danger passes. Relief softened Wade's features. Thank you. I've got enough to worry about without, he stopped abruptly, as if he'd said more than intended. Without what? Gabrielle pressed. Wade met her gaze directly. Without worrying about you being alone and unprotected, he finished quietly. You matter to me, Gabrielle, more than I probably have a right to say. The simple declaration made her heart skip. You matter to me too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment they stood in silence, the acknowledgement of deeper feelings hanging between them. Then the sheriff called Wade's name, breaking the spell. I have to go, Wade said reluctantly. Pack what you need for a few days. I'll escort you to the Campbells this evening. Gabrielle nodded, already mentally cataloging what she would need. Be careful, Wade. A ghost of his usual smile appeared. Always am. As promised, Wade arrived at the schoolhouse just before sunset to escort Gabrielle to the Campbells' home. She had packed a small valise with essentials and secured the building as best she could. Ready? Wade asked, taking the valise from her hand. As I'll ever be, Gabrielle replied, locking the schoolhouse door with a sense of foreboding. I feel as though I'm abandoning my post. You're being sensible, Wade corrected her. The town council would insist on it if they knew the full situation. They walked briskly toward the center of town, Wade's eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He carried his rifle in addition to his revolver, a visible sign of the increased danger. The Campbell home was a comfortable two-story building near the doctor's office. Catherine Campbell greeted them warmly, ushering Gabrielle into a cozy guest room while Wade checked the house's security. It will be nice to have company, Catherine said as she helped Gabrielle settle in. The doctor is often out at night with patients and the house gets lonely. I appreciate your hospitality, Gabrielle replied sincerely. I hope it won't be for long. Stay as long as needed, Catherine assured her. The marshal was quite insistent that you have proper protection. Something in her tone made Gabrielle glance up sharply. What do you mean? Catherine smiled knowingly. Only that Wade Daniels has never been one to show particular concern for any woman in town before you arrived. It's noteworthy. Before Gabrielle could respond to this observation, Wade rejoined them, having completed his inspection of the premises. Windows and doors are secure, he reported. Doctor's got a shotgun in the front closet if needed. Let's hope it won't come to that, Catherine said firmly. Now, both of you must be hungry. I've prepared supper and I won't take no for an answer, Marshal. Wade hesitated, clearly torn between duty and the invitation. Just for a short while, he finally agreed. Sheriff's expecting me for the first patrol at 8. Supper was a pleasant affair despite the circumstances, with Catherine proving to be an excellent cook and engaging conversationalist. She shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis and her courtship with Dr. Campbell, whom she had met when he treated her brother for typhoid. Never thought I'd end up in Montana territory, she confessed as she served apple cobbler for dessert, but love leads us to unexpected places. Wade caught Gabrielle's eye across the table, a silent understanding passing between them. Yes, love did indeed lead to unexpected places and unexpected people. All too soon, the mantel clock chimed 8, signaling Wade's departure. Catherine tactfully busied herself in the kitchen, giving them a moment of privacy in the front hallway. I'll check on you tomorrow, Wade promised as he buckled on his gun belt. Stay inside after dark, keep the doors locked. I will, Gabrielle assured him. You're the one facing real danger. Please be careful, Wade's expression softened. When this is over, he said quietly, we need to finish that conversation from the night of the bonfire. Yes, Gabrielle agreed, her pulse quickening at the thought. We do. For a brief moment, Wade's hand touched hers, a gentle pressure that conveyed more than words could express. Then he was gone, striding into the gathering darkness with purpose in his step. Gabrielle closed and locked the door behind him, offering a silent prayer for his safety. Whatever the future held for them, they first had to survive the present danger. And with the Blackwell gang's shadow looming over Willow Creek, that was far from certain. The next 3 days passed in a state of tense anticipation. Gabrielle continued teaching, though her class size dwindled as worried parents kept children home. Those who did attend were subdued, the usual schoolyard laughter muted by the adults' anxiety. Each evening, Wade stopped by the Campbell home to check on Gabrielle and provide updates on the situation. The territorial marshals had sent word they were delayed by flooding along the northern route, while reports placed the Blackwell gang ever closer to Willow Creek. On the 4th day, Gabrielle dismissed her remaining students at noon, following Wade's recommendation to reduce hours further. She was erasing the blackboard when a movement at the window caught her eye. Turning sharply, she glimpsed a figure ducking out of sight. Her heart hammering, Gabrielle approached the window cautiously, peering out at the schoolyard. Nothing seemed amiss, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Someone had been watching her, she was certain of it. Gathering her papers quickly, she locked the schoolhouse and hurried toward town, glancing over her shoulder repeatedly. The streets were unusually quiet, most businesses having reduced their hours as the threat loomed. She had almost reached the doctor's office when Eleanor Hammond emerged from the general store. "Miss Scott," Eleanor called, her tone surprisingly civil. "A moment, please." Gabrielle paused, her instinct to continue to safety warring with courtesy. "Yes, Miss Hammond." Eleanor approached, her expression grave. "The town council met this morning. In light of current circumstances, we've decided to suspend school entirely until the danger has passed." "I see," Gabrielle replied, relieved rather than offended. "That seems a sensible precaution, indeed." Eleanor glanced around the deserted street. "We also discussed the harvest ball scheduled for next weekend. It will be postponed, of course." The harvest ball was an annual tradition, marking the official end of the growing season with a formal dance and dinner. Under normal circumstances, Gabrielle would have looked forward to it. Now, such festivities seemed remote and inconsequential. "A wise decision," she agreed. "If you'll excuse me, I should return to the Campbells," the marshal advised against lingering outdoors. Eleanor nodded, her usual antagonism notably absent. "Of course. Stay safe, Miss Scott." As Gabrielle continued toward her temporary refuge, she reflected on the change in Eleanor's demeanor. Danger had a way of shifting perspectives, it seemed. Petty rivalries and social hierarchies mattered little when life itself was threatened. She had just reached the Campbell home when she heard horses approaching at a gallop. Turning, she saw Wade and Sheriff Collins riding hard from the direction of the river road, dust billowing behind them. They reined in sharply at the marshal's office, dismounting in haste. Something had happened, something significant. Gabrielle hurried inside to inform Catherine, finding her in the kitchen preparing dinner. "The marshal and sheriff just returned," she reported, moving to the window for a better view. "They seem agitated." Catherine joined her, concern etching her gentle features. "That can't be good news. John said they were tracking reports of strangers seen north of town this morning." Before either woman could speculate further, a knock came at the front door. Catherine answered it to find a young deputy, his expression grim. "Marshal's calling an emergency town meeting, madam," he announced. "Town hall, half an hour, everyone's to attend, no exceptions." "We'll be there," Catherine assured him, closing the door with a troubled frown. "I don't like this, Gabrielle. Emergency meetings are for dire circumstances." "Perhaps they've received reinforcements," Gabrielle suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Catherine shook her head. "No, this is something else, something worse." The town hall was packed by the time they arrived, townspeople filing in with solemn faces and hushed voices. Wade and Sheriff Collins stood at the front of the room, conferring quietly with Judge Porter and the mayor. All looked grave. Gabrielle and Catherine found seats near the middle, alongside Mrs. Hollister and several other members of the Women's Improvement Society. Eleanor Hammond sat in the front row, her back rigid with tension. At precisely 4 o'clock, Mayor Barnes called the meeting to order. Citizens of Willow Creek, Marshal Daniels has important information to share. Please give him your full attention. Wade stepped forward, his expression more serious than Gabrielle had ever seen it. This afternoon, Sheriff Collins and I discovered evidence that the Blackwell gang has entered our valley, he began without preamble. We found their campsite about 5 miles north, recently abandoned. Based on what we saw, we estimate their numbers at 8 to 10 men, heavily armed. A murmur of alarm swept through the crowd. Wade raised a hand for silence. We believe they're planning to hit the bank, possibly as soon as tomorrow. The territorial marshals are still at least 2 days out, which means we're on our own for now. What do you propose, Marshal? Judge Porter asked, his deep voice carrying across the hushed room. Sheriff Collins and I have developed a defense plan, Wade replied, nodding to his colleague. We'll need every able-bodied man to help defend the town. The sheriff stepped forward, unrolling a crude map of Willow Creek on the table. We'll establish defensive positions here, here, and here, he indicated, pointing to strategic locations. Bank employees will remove most cash reserves to a secure location tonight. What remains will be bait. You mean to trap them? Judge Porter observed shrewdly. Wade nodded. It's our best option. Let them think they're getting what they want, then close the net. With enough armed men in the right positions, we can end this threat before anyone gets hurt. And if your plan fails? Eleanor Hammond asked, her voice cutting through the murmurs. What then, Marshal? Wade met her gaze directly. Then we fight as best we can, madam, but I don't intend to let it come to that. The meeting continued with specific assignments for the defense of Willow Creek. Women and children would gather at the church, the sturdiest building in town, under the protection of several trusted men. Others would take up positions according to the marshal's plan, creating a defensive perimeter around the bank and Main Street. As the meeting broke up, Gabrielle found herself swept along with Catherine toward the church, where they would help prepare for the women and children. She caught glimpses of Wade directing volunteers, his tall figure moving purposefully among the crowd. She wanted to speak with him, to wish him well, to say all the things that might be left unsaid if the worst happened. But duty separated them, his to the town's defense, hers to the frightened children who would need reassurance in the coming hours. By nightfall, Willow Creek had transformed from a peaceful frontier town to an armed camp. Men with rifles patrolled the streets, shop windows were barricaded, and the bank stood as a fortress at the heart of it all. At the church, women prepared food and arranged bedding for what might be a long siege. Gabrielle moved among the children, organizing quiet games and reading stories to distract them from the tension in the air. She had just settled a group of younger ones with a tale about a clever rabbit when Catherine touched her shoulder. The marshal is asking for you, she said quietly. He's at the side door. Heart pounding, Gabrielle made her way through the crowded church to where Wade stood in the shadows of the narrow hallway. He had exchanged his usual attire for darker clothing, with ammunition belts crossed over his chest. The badge still gleamed on his vest. You shouldn't be here, Gabrielle said, anxiety sharpening her tone. If they're watching the town, they are, Wade confirmed grimly, but I needed to see you before. He left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung in the air between them. Wade, Gabrielle began, then found words inadequate. Instead, she reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. Come back safely, please. He squeezed her fingers, his calloused palm warm against hers. I'll do my best. His blue eyes held hers intently. Gabrielle, if something happens, don't, she interrupted, unable to bear the thought. Don't speak as if you won't return, Wade persisted, his voice low and urgent. I need to say this. If I don't make it, know that these past months knowing you has been the greatest gift of my life. I never expected to find someone like you in Willow Creek, someone who challenges me, inspires me, makes me want to be better than I am." Tears threatened, but Gabrielle blinked them back. "I feel the same," she whispered. "But this isn't goodbye, Wade Daniels. This is until later. You will come back and we will have that conversation we've been postponing." A ghost of his familiar smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." He hesitated, then bent and pressed a swift, gentle kiss to her forehead. "Stay safe." Then he was gone, slipping out into the darkness to face whatever danger approached. Gabrielle returned to the main room of the church, her composure intact despite the tumult of emotions within. The children needed her calm presence now more than ever. The night stretched endlessly, minutes crawling by with agonizing slowness. The youngest children eventually succumbed to sleep, but most adults remained awake, listening for any sound that might indicate the beginning of hostilities. Around 3 in the morning, the distant crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. It was followed immediately by more gunfire, a ragged volley that seemed to come from the direction of the bank. Women clutched children closer, men with shotguns moved to the doors, and the pastor began to pray aloud. Gabrielle found herself holding the hands of 2 terrified little girls, murmuring reassurances she herself didn't feel. The gunfire continued, sporadic bursts punctuated by shouts too indistinct to understand. Somewhere in that chaos, Wade was fighting for his life and the safety of Willow Creek. The firefight seemed to last forever, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Gradually, the shooting tapered off until a final volley echoed through the night, followed by an eerie silence. No one in the church moved, all holding their breath, waiting for some sign of the outcome. Had their defenders prevailed? Or were the outlaws even now making their way toward the church, intent on eliminating witnesses as they had in other towns? A pounding at the main door startled everyone. The men raised their weapons, aiming at the entrance. "It's Collins," came a shout from outside. "Open up." The sheriff's familiar voice sent a wave of relief through the room. The door was unbarred and Sheriff Collins entered, bleeding from a graze on his arm but otherwise unharmed. "It's over," he announced to the waiting crowd. "We got them. 4 dead, 3 captured. 2 got away, but they're wounded and heading away from town." A cheer went up, quickly followed by questions about casualties among the defenders. The sheriff raised his hands for quiet. "We lost Bob Jenkins," he said solemnly. "Took a bullet meant for Judge Porter. 3 others wounded, including the marshal, but Doc says they'll recover." Gabrielle's heart seemed to stop. "The marshal is wounded," Sheriff Collins nodded, his expression softening as he met her anxious gaze. "Bullet to the shoulder, lost some blood, but he's conscious and ornery as ever. Doc's with him now at his office." Without conscious thought, Gabrielle moved toward the door. Catherine caught her arm. "You can't go alone," she cautioned. "It might still be dangerous." "I'll escort her," Sheriff Collins offered. "I need to report back to the marshal anyway." The streets of Willow Creek were eerily quiet as they made their way to the doctor's office. Dawn was just breaking, casting long shadows across the bullet-pocked buildings. The bank's windows were shattered, and bloodstains darkened the dirt of the main street. Men still stood at their defensive positions, rifles ready despite the sheriff's assurances that the danger had passed. At the doctor's office, they found Dr. Campbell finishing his treatment of Wade's shoulder. The marshal sat upright on the examination table, his face pale beneath his tan but his eyes alert. His shirt had been cut away, revealing a white bandage stark against his skin. "Sheriff," he acknowledged Collins, then his gaze found Gabrielle and his expression softened. "Miss Scott." "You shouldn't be here." "The sheriff escorted me," she replied, moving to his side. "How badly are you hurt?" "Clean through the shoulder," Dr. Campbell answered for him, securing the bandage with practiced hands. "Missed the bone, missed any major vessels. He'll have limited use of the arm for a few weeks, but with proper care he should recover fully." "Told you I'd come back," Wade said to Gabrielle, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "So you did," she replied, blinking back tears of relief. "Though you might have managed it without a bullet hole." A tired smile touched his lips. "I'll try to remember that next time." Sheriff Collins cleared his throat. Marshal, we've got the prisoners secured at the jail. Territorial marshals should arrive tomorrow to take them to Helena for trial. Wade nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. Good work, Collins. Those two that escaped headed north, both bleeding badly. I've got men tracking them, but with their injuries, they won't get far. Keep me informed, Wade instructed, then turned to the doctor. Am I free to go, doctor? Campbell frowned. I'd prefer you stay here for observation. I need to secure the town, Wade interrupted. Can't do that from a sick, the doctor sighed, recognizing a losing battle. At least rest for a few hours. The sheriff can handle things that long. I'll make sure he rests, Gabrielle promised, surprising herself with her boldness. At the schoolhouse, it's quiet there, away from the commotion in town. Wade looked startled by the suggestion, but didn't object. Sheriff Collins coughed discreetly and excused himself to check on the prisoners, while Dr. Campbell busied himself with his medical supplies, tactfully avoiding eye contact. If you're certain, Wade said finally. I wouldn't want to impose. I'm certain, Gabrielle replied firmly. You need rest, and I need to know you're safe. The simple admission hung between them, more intimate than any declaration of love. Wade's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Lead the way, then. The walk to the schoolhouse was slow, Wade's injury making each step an effort, though he tried not to show it. Gabrielle supported him as best she could, her arm around his waist, his good arm draped across her shoulders. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, dawn had fully broken, revealing a crisp autumn day that belied the violence of the night. Inside, Gabrielle helped Wade to the small settee in her quarters. He sank onto it gratefully, exhaustion finally catching up with him now that duty no longer demanded his attention. She brought him water, helped him remove his boots, and gently placed a pillow behind his injured shoulder. You should rest too, Wade said, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes. You've been up all night. Soon, she promised, settling into the chair opposite him. I need to see you resting first. Wade's lips curved in a tired smile. Stubborn woman. Look, who's talking, Gabrielle retorted, but without heat. They fell into a comfortable silence, the events of the night slowly receding as sunlight streamed through the windows. Wade's eyes grew heavy, his breathing deepening as exhaustion claimed him. Gabrielle watched him sleep, her own fatigue momentarily forgotten in the profound relief of seeing him alive, safe in her home. Eventually, she too succumbed to sleep, curled in her chair, lulled by the steady rhythm of Wade's breathing and the knowledge that the danger had passed. Whatever came next for Willow Creek, and for them could wait until they had both recovered from the ordeal, Wade awoke to the soft sound of movement in the small kitchen. For a moment, disorientation gripped him as he tried to place his surroundings. Then memory returned the gunfight, his injury, Gabrielle bringing him to the schoolhouse. The thought of her brought a smile to his lips even as pain throbbed in his shoulder. You're awake, Gabrielle said, appearing in the doorway with a steaming cup. How do you feel? Like I've been kicked by a mule, Wade admitted, pushing himself to a sitting position with his good arm. But I'll live. Gabrielle handed him the cup, which contained strong coffee sweetened with honey. Dr. Campbell stopped by while you were sleeping. He left laudanum for the pain and instructions for changing your bandage. Wade nodded his thanks, taking a careful sip of the coffee. What time is it? Nearly sunset, Gabrielle replied. You've slept most of the day, he frowned, immediately concerned about his neglected duties. The town is fine, Gabrielle assured him. Sheriff Collins has everything well in hand. The two escaped outlaws were found dead in the woods and the prisoners are secure. The territorial marshals arrived an hour ago. Relief eased the tension from Wade's shoulders. Good, that's good. He studied her face, noting that she looked rested, having changed into a fresh dress and arranged her hair in its usual neat style. And you, are you all right? I'm fine, Gabrielle said, settling beside him on the settee. Though I'd be better if you hadn't frightened me half to death getting yourself shot. Wade's lips twitched at her scolding tone. Wasn't exactly in my plans for the evening, I should hope not. Her expression softened as she reached out to touch his hand. I was so worried, Wade. The simple admission, spoken in that gentle voice, affected him more than the most elaborate declaration might have. Wade turned his hand to clasp hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm sorry for that, but I'm here now, we both are." "Yes." Gabrielle met his gaze, her green eyes steady and clear. "And I believe we have a conversation to finish." Wade's heart quickened. "We do at that." He set aside the coffee cup, giving her his full attention despite the pain in his shoulder. "Gabrielle Scott, from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, you've occupied my thoughts in a way no woman ever has. I know your position in this town is precarious, and my attention hasn't made it easier. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is merely friendship." Gabrielle's fingers tightened around his. "Nor can I," she admitted softly. "I came to Willow Creek seeking a fresh start, determined to focus solely on my career. I never expected to find you a man who respects my independence even as he offers his strength, who sees beyond the Eastern schoolteacher to the woman beneath." "Is it too soon to say I love you?" Wade asked, the words he'd held back for weeks finally finding voice. "Because I do, Gabrielle. I love your courage, your intelligence, your kind heart that puts others before yourself. I love the way you stand up to Eleanor Hammond and the way you comfort scared children. I love everything about you." Tears shimmered in Gabrielle's eyes. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "I love you too, Wade Daniels, more than I thought possible in such a short time." The admission hung in the air between them, momentous and yet utterly natural, as if they had always been moving toward this moment. Wade reached up with his good hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a prayer. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I've wanted to since that first day when you stood so brave and dignified despite those women's snickering." In answer, Gabrielle leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began softly, tentatively, then deepened as both surrendered to feelings too long restrained. Wade's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer despite the twinge in his shoulder. Nothing, not pain, not propriety, not the outside world mattered in this perfect moment of connection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Well," he murmured, a smile in his voice, "that was worth waiting for." Gabrielle laughed softly, the sound like music to his ears. "Indeed it was, Marshal." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the schoolhouse door. Gabrielle pulled away reluctantly, smoothing her skirts as she rose to answer it. Wade straightened his own appearance as best he could with one functional arm, aware that appearances still mattered despite their private declarations. Sheriff Collins stood at the door, hat in hand. "Pardon the intrusion, Miss Scott. Need a word with the marshal if he's up to it." "Of course," Gabrielle replied, stepping aside to admit him. "He's much improved." Collins entered, nodding to Wade. "Marshal, territorial boys are ready to move out with the prisoners at first light. Thought you'd want to know." "I'll be there to see them off," Wade assured him, pushing himself to his feet with minimal wincing. "What about Jenkins? Arrangements made. Funerals day after tomorrow," Collins confirmed. "Town's taking up a collection for his widow. Mayor wants you to say a few words if you're able." "I'll be there," Wade promised grimly. Bob Jenkins had been a good man, a friend who'd volunteered without hesitation when danger threatened. His death was the one dark shadow on their victory. After discussing a few more details of the town's recovery efforts, Collins took his leave, tipping his hat to Gabrielle as he departed. "Miss Scott, folks are saying the schoolhouse will reopen next week." "That's the plan," Gabrielle confirmed. "Once things have settled, good. My boy's been driving his mother crazy at home." With a final nod to Wade, the sheriff departed, closing the door behind him. Alone again, Wade turned to Gabrielle, his expression serious. "This changes things between us," he said quietly. "People will talk, especially after I spent the day here." "Let them talk," Gabrielle replied with unexpected firmness. "We've done nothing wrong, and after what this town has just endured, I suspect gossip will be the least of anyone's concerns." "Even Eleanor Hammond's?" Wade asked, raising an eyebrow. Gabrielle smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Even hers. Besides, I have reason to believe Miss Hammond's attitude toward me has softened somewhat. Crisis has a way of reordering priorities. That it does, Wade agreed, thinking of his own shift in perspective. Nearly dying had a way of clarifying what truly mattered. Still, I don't want to compromise your position. The school board can find another teacher if they object to my personal choices, Gabrielle interrupted, surprising him with her vehemence. I came to Willow Creek seeking independence, but I've found something far more precious. I won't sacrifice love for appearances, Wade, not anymore. Her declaration warmed him more deeply than the strongest whiskey. In that case, Miss Scott, he said formally, though his eyes danced with happiness, would you do me the honor of accompanying me to Bob Jenkins' funeral? As my official companion, not just a fellow mourner. I would be honored, Gabrielle replied with equal formality. Wade took her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. And after that, once I'm healed and things have settled, we'll talk about more permanent arrangements, if that suits you. Gabrielle's smile was answer enough, but she added for good measure, "It suits me very well indeed, Marshal Daniels." As the sun set over Willow Creek, casting long shadows through the schoolhouse windows, Wade gathered Gabrielle close with his good arm. Their second kiss was deeper than the first, a promise of all that awaited them in a future suddenly rich with possibility. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek gradually returned to normal. Buildings damaged during the shootout were repaired, the bank reopened with additional security measures, and school resumed its regular schedule. Bob Jenkins was laid to rest with full honors, his sacrifice acknowledged by the entire community. Wade, true to his word, spoke eloquently of his friend's courage with Gabrielle at his side throughout the service. Their relationship, now open and acknowledged, became the subject of inevitable gossip, but less than either had feared. The town had faced death together and emerged victorious. In the aftermath of such an ordeal, two people finding happiness seemed a cause for celebration rather than censure. Even Eleanor Hammond, after an initial period of frosty disapproval, eventually conceded that Gabrielle's personal life had not affected her professional excellence. This grudging acceptance might have had something to do with Judge Porter's pointed comments about modern thinking and attracting quality educators to the frontier. But whatever the reason, Eleanor's opposition gradually subsided to mere occasional sniffs of disapproval when the couple appeared together at church or town functions. By Thanksgiving, Wade's shoulder had healed completely, allowing him to return to full duties as marshal. He had taken to calling on Gabrielle properly in the evenings, sitting with her on the schoolhouse porch when weather permitted, or by the fire in her small quarters when the Montana winter set in with its customary ferocity. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after Gabrielle's arrival in Willow Creek, the town gathered at the church for the annual holiday celebration. Children performed a nativity play directed by their teacher, of course. The choir sang carols, and afterward, gifts and treats were exchanged in the festively decorated meeting hall. Gabrielle stood near the punch bowl, watching her students exclaim over peppermint sticks and small wooden toys. She wore her best dress for the occasion, a deep green velvet that Mrs. Hollister had helped her alter from one of the dresses that had finally arrived in her trunks from Boston. "You look beautiful tonight," came Wade's voice from behind her. Gabrielle turned to find him watching her, appreciation evident in his blue eyes. In his marshal's coat and freshly polished boots, with his wheat-colored hair neatly combed, he cut quite the figure himself. "Thank you, kind sir," she replied with a playful curtsy. "You're looking rather handsome yourself." Wade glanced around the crowded hall, then took her hand. "Come outside with me for a minute. There's something I want to show you." Curious, Gabrielle followed him through the side door into the church garden. Snow blanketed the ground and frosted the bare branches of trees, gleaming silver in the moonlight. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "It's freezing," Gabrielle protested, though she smiled as she said it. "What could possibly need showing in this weather?" Wade led her to a stone bench, carefully brushing snow from its surface before guiding her to sit. "Just look up," he suggested, settling beside her. Gabrielle tilted her face to the sky and gasped in delight. Above them stretched the most magnificent display of stars she had ever witnessed, diamond bright against the velvet darkness. The Milky Way arched across the heavens like a celestial road, and here and there, shooting stars traced brief, brilliant paths. "It's beautiful," she breathed, momentarily forgetting the cold. "Like heaven itself has opened." "Old-timers call it the Christmas sky," Wade explained, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Only happens when conditions are just right, clear air, no moon, perfect darkness." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, admiring the spectacle. Then Wade shifted slightly, reaching into his coat pocket. "There's another reason I brought you out here," he admitted. "Wanted some privacy for what I'm about to ask." Gabrielle's heart began to race as Wade took both her hands in his expression suddenly solemn. "Gabrielle Scott," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and laughter and learning to a town that needed all three, and to a man who didn't know he was incomplete until he met you." He released one of her hands to withdraw a small velvet box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Christmas Eve, under the brightest stars of the year, seemed fitting. Opening the box, he revealed a ring, a modest diamond flanked by two smaller sapphires that matched his eyes perfectly. "I love you with all that I am, all that I have to offer. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Gabrielle's eyes, freezing on her lashes in the December air. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Wade Daniels, I will marry you." His smile outshone even the magnificent stars above them as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was kissing her, his arms strong and secure around her waist, her hands tangled in his hair, both oblivious to the cold in the warmth of their shared joy. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Wade pressed his forehead to hers. "Mrs. Wade Daniels," he murmured, "has a nice ring to it." "Indeed it does," Gabrielle agreed, admiring how the starlight caught the facets of her diamond. "Though I hope the school board will allow me to continue teaching, I'm not quite ready to give up my classroom." "I wouldn't ask you to," Wade assured her. "You were born to teach, just as I was born to uphold the law. We'll make it work together." A noise from the church door interrupted their private moment, the sounds of the celebration spilling out as someone exited the building. Gabrielle recognized Eleanor Hammond's distinctive silhouette, accompanied by several other women from the Improvement Society. "Oh," Eleanor said, spotting them on the bench. "Marshal, Miss Scott, we didn't realize anyone was out here." Wade stood, helping Gabrielle to her feet. "Just showing Miss Scott the Christmas sky," he explained, not bothering to hide his smile, and asking her a rather important question. Eleanor's gaze dropped to Gabrielle's hand, where the new ring caught the light from the church windows. For a moment her expression was unreadable, then, to Gabrielle's astonishment, a genuine smile softened her usually stern features. "Well," Eleanor said, "it's about time. Congratulations to you both." The other women immediately surrounded them with excited exclamations and questions about wedding dates. Wade slipped his arm around Gabrielle's waist, a steady presence amid the flurry of feminine attention. "Spring, we think," Gabrielle was saying in response to inquiries about timing. "After the mud season but before the summer heat. The Women's Improvement Society will assist with arrangements, of course," Eleanor declared, already taking charge. "A proper wedding is just what this town needs after the troubles of the fall." Wade caught Gabrielle's eye over the women's heads, his expression a mixture of amusement and resignation. She stifled a laugh, understanding perfectly Eleanor Hammond would never change completely, but her support, however controlling, was preferable to her opposition. News of their engagement spread through the church hall like wildfire. For the next hour, they received congratulations from what seemed like every resident of Willow Creek. Dr. and Mrs. Campbell were especially pleased, Catherine claiming she had known from the first that they were meant for each other. Judge Porter offered a formal blessing while Mrs. Hollister wept happy tears and insisted on hosting the engagement dinner. By the time they finally managed to leave the celebration, it was nearly midnight. Wade escorted Gabrielle back to the schoolhouse through streets hushed with new fallen snow. At her door, he kissed her once more, a kiss that held the promise of all their tomorrows. "Merry Christmas, my love," he whispered against her lips. "Merry Christmas," Gabrielle replied, her heart so full of happiness she thought it might burst. "The first of many we'll share together." As Wade reluctantly departed, propriety still demanded they live separately until their wedding. Gabrielle stood on the schoolhouse porch, watching until he disappeared into the darkness. Her finger traced the unfamiliar weight of the ring, a tangible symbol of how dramatically her life had changed since that dusty summer day when she'd first arrived in Willow Creek. She had come seeking a fresh start, a place to rebuild her life after loss and disappointment. What she had found was beyond anything she could have imagined: a community that valued her skills, friends who supported her growth, and a man who loved her exactly as she was. The women might have snickered at her dress that first day, but Wade had seen her true beauty. And in doing so, he had helped her rediscover it herself. With a smile that rivaled the Christmas stars overhead, Gabrielle Scott, soon to be Gabrielle Daniels, turned and entered her home, already dreaming of the spring day when she would begin the next chapter of her frontier adventure, hand in hand with the man who had captured her heart beneath the vast Montana sky.